You're now on the road beyond, taking you places both far and near. I'm Todd Duplantis. Thanks for joining us tonight. Hello, Facebook Live. We've got a great show lined up for you tonight. Some special guests. Ike McFadden, normally here as my co-host. He's on vacation this week. We'll hear from him in our next episode. But we've got Derrel Sims, the alien hunter, is my special co-host tonight. Welcome back to the show, Derrel. Thanks for subbing for Ike tonight.
I'm glad to be here. You've got some great people lined up tonight.
We certainly do. And I want to ask you first off the top, what do you got going on this week? Are you working on anything that you can let us know about?
Well, yes, as a matter of fact, I have got our website is completely being redone, and you won't even recognize it. It's very nice. And second, I've met an elderly gentleman who claims to have technology based on the Roswell event. And no one's ever talked to him before, and we'll see if he's got the goods or not.
Where can they go to find you on your website?
You can go to alienhunter.org and click on it, and that'll take you right on in.
All right. Well, Derrel, we're going to talk about a subject I know you're very familiar with, cryptids. We're talking cryptids from Loch Ness to Monster to Bigfoot, and we're joined by one of the leaders in the field of cryptids, Ken Gerhard. Ken is a widely recognized cryptozoologist and field investigator for the Center of Fortean Zoology, as well as the fellow of the Pangea Institute and a consultant for several research organizations. He's traveled the world looking for monsters. We're going to hear about a lot of them tonight. In addition to co-hosting the History Channel TV series Missing in Alaska, Ken has appeared on many other networks, including the Travel Channel, National Geographic, and Sci-Fi. He has traveled to 26 different countries on 6 continents and visited virtually all of the United States. Please welcome to the road beyond, Ken Gerhard. Ken, welcome back to the show. Proud to have you with us tonight.
Good evening, gentlemen. It's always a pleasure to be here with you. And I'm honored to be here and excited to talk about cryptozoology.
So I want to talk about your new book. Your latest one's called The Essential Guide to the Loch Ness Monster and Other Aquatic Cryptids. And let's talk about, there's something in the waters of Loch Ness. We're not sure exactly what it is, but you've got a few theories. What do you think is in those waters?
Well, one theory that I kind of advocate in the book, and of course, as with many of our unexplained mysteries, we're really just speculating based on the best information we have. But based on the majority of eyewitness descriptions, and there are about 3,000 or so well-documented Nessie sightings, most people describe a large hump or several large humps that come up out of the water, and they vertically undulate, so up and down when they move, which is a mammalian characteristic. If you know anything about zoology, mammals, they tend to flex up and down in aquatic mammals like whales and otters and seals, things like that. And fish and reptiles move side to side. They undulate horizontally.
Right.
And also people describe the skin as looking very whale-like or smooth. So, but the general form is a very long, elongated animal. So based on all of those descriptions, which seem to be the most prevalent, I speculate that the Loch Ness Monster, if it exists, is a ancient type of surviving whale known as an archaeocete or a basilosaur. And these were whales that evolved way back in the Eocene, about 40 million years ago, and supposedly died out. But they seem to match the descriptions of the Loch Ness Monster. And also, of course, Loch Ness is a very cold lake. So it would be conducive to a warm-blooded animal, large warm-blooded animal. And also cetaceans like whales and porpoises are also known to sometimes come into fresh water from the ocean. That's been documented as well. So based on all of that, and again, I'm just speculating, but I'm thinking an intriguing theory might be that these could be these ancient serpentine whales.
And Ken, I know you're familiar with Derrel Sims. Derrel, you want to jump on in with a question for Ken?
I do. it's weird that the first supposed picture of the creature was later proven to be fake. But
Yeah.
Are there others that are more intriguing? Have we got any better evidence there, Ken?
Yeah, that's a great question. The surgeon's photo, which you mentioned, which is the iconic image of Nessie, people always picture the small head and the long neck poking out of the water. That was proven to be a hoax in 1994. And that is the image that most people have in their heads. But again, that's not what most witnesses describe. It's the big humps. The head and neck sightings are very rare. There is better photographic evidence. The Tim Dinsdale film from April 23rd, 1960 is a film, about a minute of film that shows a large hump moving through the water, leaving a wake behind, and at one point it seems to submerge. That film's been scrutinized and analyzed, and in fact was endorsed by JERIC, the Joint Air Reconnaissance Intelligence Committee in England, which studies different types of photographic evidence. And then in 2007, much more recently, there was a videotape filmed by a Nessie researcher named Gordon Holmes. And it shows a snake-like animal about 10 or 15 feet long just beneath the surface of the water, wiggling along. In terms of still photographs, there's been nothing really conclusive through the years. There have been a number of hoaxes since that original surgeon's photo, and we have to scrutinize a lot of the Nessie photographic evidence. But there is the Hugh Gray photograph from 1933 is still intriguing. The Peter McNabb photo from 1955. And there have even been some still photographs in recent years that have been taken by different individuals. But probably the Dinsdale footage. And also, we can't forget the underwater photos. In the early 1970s, a group known as the Academy for Applied Science from Boston was up there with these high-tech underwater cameras and strobe lights, and they got some pictures of some interesting objects down there as well. So we have some intriguing evidence, but nothing conclusive yet.
Ken, I wanted to ask you, the eyewitness reports, I mean, they seem to be everywhere regarding this. Even my mother, who ventured to Scotland back in the 90s, she got back and said, Todd, there's something in those waters over there. I saw something. I couldn't tell you what it was. But obviously there are compelling witness reports out there that really can't be discredited in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's the thing is the eyewitness descriptions are very consistent, most people. And the only time I was at Loch Ness back in 1982, I was young, but I interviewed many of the people around the loch, and all of the residents are convinced there is a large unusual animal or animals in the loch. There's also the sonar evidence, which we can get into a little bit, which a lot of people overlook, but there's a lot of compelling sonar evidence of large animate objects in the loch. But some of the most convincing eyewitness sightings include the multiple witness sightings. There have been some tour boats out on Loch Ness that have, where you've had a number of people that have had observations at the same time. But one very interesting case that I write about in my book from 1965 involved 9 eyewitnesses from different vantage points around Loch Ness who all watched this large whale-like hump move through the water. It was very animate. It was moving around, changing directions, submerging, and so forth. And those eyewitnesses include Ted Holliday, who is a renowned Nessie investigator and sports or fishing journalist, as well as a local police official, as well as the local county commissioner. And all of these people basically watched this thing for almost an hour. So that's one of the really interesting sightings. But there have been many, even in recent years. And that's one of the misconceptions about sightings of the Loch Ness Monster is that they all happened a long time ago and there haven't been sightings recently. But in fact, every year there's about 10 good sightings still on average. So they are ongoing.
Just to follow up real quickly, why haven't there been many more sightings? Is it because people have been in lockdown over the last year? And do these creatures, do they have ways, like underground caverns where they can traverse from maybe the lake out into the ocean? What could they be visiting another part of the ocean at this time?
Yeah, good questions. It's true. I do have a gentleman that wrote the foreword for my book, Steve Feltham, has been on a vigil alongside Loch Ness for 30 plus years. So he's the leading Loch Ness investigator right now. And he pointed out that Loch Ness is a big tourist destination. The population around the loch is still rather small, comparatively small. So, when the tourism industry shut down, obviously people stopped going there this past year. As far as Loch Ness is connected to the ocean, to the North Atlantic, via a series of rivers, canals, and ship locks that go up and down. There has been a theory for many years that there could be underground caverns, but the problem with that theory, Todd, is that Loch Ness lies 52 feet above sea level.
Yeah.
So if it were connected to the ocean by underwater caverns or secret caverns, it would be sea level, and the water would also be somewhat brackish and salty. And it's been tested, and there's been no evidence of that found. But it's possible that the Loch Ness Monster is occasionally traveling into the lake via these shallow rivers and canals and things.
Derrel, did you have another question you wanted to throw out?
What are the cryptids do you cover in your book, Ken? It's quite extensive. Tell us about that.
I'm sorry, you broke up there a little bit.
What are the cryptids have you covered in your book? What are the cryptids do you cover in your book?
Oh, yes, good question. So one of the compelling lines of evidence in support of the Loch Ness Monster is that similar lake monsters have been reported around the world, and all concentrated within the same lines of latitude, which is in the northern hemisphere from 45 to 60 degrees north. And they're similar types of lakes. They're all very deep, like Loch Ness, very cold water lakes that were carved out after the retreat of the glaciers at the end of the Pleistocene. So the most famous ones are the Lake Champlain Monster, or CHAMP, which has been reported in upstate New York, Vermont, and Quebec. And then you have in Canada, you have something called the Ogopogo, which is reported out in Lake Okanagan. Famous lake monsters have also been reported in Scandinavia, Iceland, Russia, Japan, Turkey, and and even Ireland and neighboring England. So you get a lot of them in the same types of lakes. I covered many of them in the book. Most of them are not well known, and also something known as sea serpents. And
Right.
Sea serpents have been reported for centuries by navigators that have traversed the oceans there and were logged by ships captains in past centuries. I believe the name serpent is a misnomer because it's describing the shape of the animal, which is a very large animal with a long body. But the descriptions are very similar to the Loch Ness Monster, the Lake Champlain Monster, Ogopogo, and others. So it seems like we're dealing with the same species and that they're distributed across the world, mostly in the oceans. And I think most of your listeners will agree that the oceans are very mysterious still. They're about 12,000 feet deep on average, cover 71% of the planet's surface. And many of the lakes that we're talking about where these monsters have been reported are connected to the ocean, Lake Champlain, Lake Okanagan, and so on and so forth.
There's a lot of places for these creatures to hide, especially when you get out in open ocean. Let's move on to Bigfoot. We want to talk a little bit about Bigfoot. We promoted that before we came on with the show. But you live in Texas. We're in Texas here, and it's home to a number of Bigfoot sightings in the Lone Star State. Where are those mainly concentrated? I know Derrel was telling me a story about a investigation you did in the Midland area. Is that right, Derrel?
That is correct. There was a Bigfoot reporting out there, and they have some film footage of it. I did see it, but I'm very interested to hear what Ken has to say about this.
Yeah, well, most people are probably surprised to hear that Bigfoot is reported a lot in Texas. Most people associate Bigfoot with the Pacific Northwest, Washington, Oregon, Northern California. And then you also have a lot of sightings in Florida where it's called the skunk ape. And then Ohio and Pennsylvania seems to have a high concentration. But Texas ranks about 7th in the United States in terms of the volume of sightings every year. Now, most of those, and they are spread out across the state, but the vast majority of the sightings in Texas occur in the eastern part of the state, pretty much anything east of I-45. We have a heavy concentration in the Big Thicket, Sam Houston National Forest, just north of Houston.
The Piney Woods.
Piney Woods extending up into the northeastern part of the state where you have Jefferson, Texas, the Bigfoot capital of Texas, and Caddo Lake. And then across the borders there in adjacent areas, you have a lot of sightings in southeast Oklahoma and the Ouachita Mountains, southwest Arkansas, where you have something called the Fouke Monster, and then northwest Louisiana. So wherever there are piney woods and thickets, it seems like you get a lot of sightings. But, as Derrel mentioned, I mean, there have been sightings here a few around San Antonio where I live,
Yep.
And I know of some even going west towards El Paso and places like Junction and stuff like that. And there have also been a lot of sightings up near Fort Worth, kind of the west of Fort Worth. So yeah, they do seem to be distributed. Now, I have a theory that they may be nomadic, and maybe that's why people occasionally see them in other areas as they're moving around.
Fascinating. There have been several books and reports linking Bigfoot sightings and other paranormal activity in areas such as UFOs. What's your opinion of any possible connection between the two?
Well, Derrel, admittedly, I'm a skeptic when it comes to presumed connections with UFOs and other paranormal activity regarding Bigfoot. Now, I know there are, as you said, there have been accounts that, a lot of people have, come up with that are pretty far out there. A friend of mine, Stan Gordon, who you may know from Pennsylvania, I mean, he's been investigating UFOs since the early 70s. And, he basically started getting a lot of really strange Bigfoot reports around those same time periods. Wherever there were UFO flaps in Western Pennsylvania, there were Bigfoot creatures being seen in the same areas. So I know there are those stories, but what I try to do with Bigfoot is I look at the broad view, which is the main body of evidence, which is about 6,000 documented sightings that have been put into different databases since the 1950s and before. And if you look at the vast majority, at least 99% of the sightings are pretty straightforward in terms of people mainly see Bigfoot like crossing the road at night, or it's hiding behind a tree, peeking at them, or it's walking through the woods, drinking water. So, I'm just going based on most of that evidence. It's harder for you to make a case in terms of, some of these kind of far out theories, but that's my experience. And I understand there are other people that have experienced things and looked at evidence that maybe I haven't. I do have a couple of quick theories on that. One is that there could be some type of metaphysical phenomenon that looks like Bigfoot, something that mimics Bigfoot in some way, or, if you look at a lot of other weird creature reports from around the world, that, there could be something going on beyond our comprehension. And for whatever reason, it looks or feels like Bigfoot or projects like a Bigfoot when people experience it. The other theory, I think, is that, maybe, just a quick story here. I was investigating Bigfoot one time at a place called Charles Mill Lake near Mansfield, Ohio. And there had been Bigfoot sightings out there, and I saw a UFO, like one of these big black triangle things that people are always talking about. And I'm not saying, I don't know what it was. It could have been military, who knows? But it was this giant silent black thing floating over a lake where a Bigfoot had been reported. So, I'm not personally connecting the two, but that's an example of how people's experiences sometimes, can seemingly present connections and links that our mind naturally, is going to put two things together because they're both mysterious and they're sighted in the same location. So there are these spooky spots, right, where people tend to experience a lot more or a higher percentage of unexplained phenomenon. So I actually don't know, but it's a great question.
Ken, I wanted to ask you, because a lot of people are wondering, why haven't we found a Bigfoot body? And or found bones of a Bigfoot? I know we talked about this before, but maybe you can give us your theory on that, because I found it fascinating last time.
It is a great question. And I always encourage everyone to think critically and to be objective when you're looking at these types of claims. I have a whole chapter in my book, The Essential Guide to Bigfoot, which is dedicated to the question, where are the remains? And again, it's a complex issue. One thing I like to point out is I personally am convinced that Bigfoot is an exceptionally rare animal, possibly teetering on the brink of extinction, maybe only a few thousand spread across the continent of North America. So they're very hard to find. They typically live in remote areas of wilderness that humans don't go. And that's where most of the bones are going to be. It seems like they've adapted behavior patterns to avoid us. They're nocturnal and they move around, they're nomadic and so forth. There are theories that maybe they hide their own dead or bury their own dead. Now, this ties into my theory of avoidance. I think Bigfoot it's intelligent enough to recognize that humans are its greatest threat and direct competition, and that we could drive it to extinction. And so therefore it chooses to avoid us, and it seems to be very weary of us. So that's one of the reasons that we may not find them, is because they're staying far away from us. Right. The other thing to keep in mind is that as apex predators, like many animals, bears and wolves, they may conceal their bodies when they're very sick or they think they're dying. So they crawl into brush or a cave or somewhere, and then they die, and their remains are kind of buried or obscured. And then the last thing I want to point out is that, the remains of large animals tend to decay quickly in the wilderness anyways, particularly in moist environments. You have things like bacteria and insects and scavenging birds and small mammals. Even deer and mice will scatter bones because they chew on bones. So,
right.
It's possible that the remains are just, disseminated quickly. I'm sorry, I know I'm rambling. Like I said, it was a complex thing.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
The last point is that I think that most people aren't really looking for Bigfoot bones. Therefore, I'm convinced that there have been people that have been hiking through the woods maybe and stepped right over a Bigfoot bone and thought, wow, look at that big bone. I wonder what that was. And just kept going. They didn't collect the bone or analyze it or anything. So, a lot of questions there. But it's still a good skeptical argument. It seems like at some point someone would have hit one with their car and killed it, or gotten better photographic evidence. So, it's definitely a mystery.
With everybody carrying cell phones and a camera, have you seen any pictures, in your opinion, that really have captured the creature at large?
I'm honestly getting more and more skeptical, Derrel, about photographic evidence as time goes on, because with the technology people have these days, it's very easy for someone to fabricate a really good photograph. And also there's a lot of motivation to do that because people are trying to build up their websites and YouTube channels and hits on their posts or whatever. So, but it is, it's a great mystery why we don't have better photographic evidence. Now, I know a lot of people are not as quick and, at the quick and ready to take a picture of something that happens, on a moment's notice. And a lot of Bigfoot encounters seem to be fleeting. It happens quickly. It's at night. It's just and by the time you get your camera out and get ready, maybe you're not quite prepared for that. But yeah, I would love to see better photographic evidence. I think with all of the trail cams and motion activated cameras out there, it seems like, security cams, that someone would have gotten a better photograph. But, the gold standard is still the 1967 Patterson-Gimlin film. That's never been disproven, but everything else is still pretty controversial.
Yes.
We've been talking with Ken Gerhard, cryptozoologist. Ken, we appreciate you joining us again on the show, and you're always welcome here. Thanks for being here tonight. Where can people find you on the web and find your books?
Oh, well, thanks again for having me on, guys. Great questions, and I always enjoy seeing you both. I have a website, kengerhard.com. People can also find me on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I have a YouTube channel that people should check out. Excuse me. And I'm also on Amazon if people want to check out any of my books.
Excellent.
Thanks, Ken. Thanks for being here tonight.
Good to see you, Derrel. Good to see you, Todd. Take care.
See you.
All right, Derrel, we're going to move on to our news. Here's a look at some of the weird, tantalizing, and just plain bizarre stories posted from our partners at the Full Spectrum Project on Facebook. Before we get to the first story, I want to let our producer know. Pete, please let the next guest know that he's on standby, and we'll be letting him in the room shortly. And we've got another guest in another episode coming up immediately after this. Okay, Derrel, our first story comes to us from the Canadian Broadcasting Company, the CBC. Haunted Hollywood reports are on the rise during the pandemic. Of course, the report claims TV show Ghost Stalkers host E.L. Tenney says he's been getting 5 to 10 calls a week from people saying their home is haunted. Tenney says people are in highly emotional state during the shutdown following a year's worth of being sequestered, and they're spending more time in their home when they normally were at work. In many cases, he says, they may be seeing some sort of paranormal stuff happening that would normally be happening, but they're not there to witness it. Tenney says that ghosts are actually the spirits of one's people. And if that's the case, well, maybe the ghosts are getting bored of the lockdown as well. Tenney claims he's seen this sort of spike before, leading up to Y2K. You remember that in 1999, and in the wake of 9/11. He says, quote, time of stress really do something to human psychology. And so you have people having deeper, stranger dreams. You have people reporting a higher amount of ghosts in their house or haunted houses. And, he's seen an increase of UFO reports since the quarantine started. And that might be because people just aren't going out, or they're going outside. Maybe the skies are clear. But, there could be reasons behind all of this, Derrel. What is your opinion? You think ghosts are more ample out there, or are people just drinking more in the lockdown?
Maybe there's a connection there. The fact is that I will address the UFO aspect, if I may. Many people are seeing things, and they'll report them to me on binocular. They'll say, I'm seeing with binoculars, I'm seeing with night vision, and so on. And we're actually seeing UFOs left and right. And I have to go back to my NASA buddy and my tech people, and they're skeptical, but they believe in the UFO phenomena, but they also are pretty critical about how you see things. Sometimes when you flash a laser up in the sky at one of these so-called UFOs that you see, and then all of a sudden you see a meteorite flash. People say, "Oh my God, it's flashing back at me." It's communicating to me, and that may not be the case at all. But what's important to me is that there are thousands of these satellites that are dead and unstable satellites that are in orbit. They're not even documented. They're not on your app that you have. Well, I'll check the satellite. They're not even on those apps. And these are satellites of foreign countries and so on. And people may be seeing things like that. Right. So you just have to be critical of your own sighting, really.
Right. Well, Derrel, some great points. We're going to get to our next story, and I want to get your opinion on this story too, because I know you're very familiar with it. But this next report comes to us from Reuters. Most of the world is familiar with Malaysia Airlines flight MH370. It disappeared more than 7 years ago with 239 people on board. Now the country's former prime minister, Najib Razak, is saying investigators have not ruled out the flight may have been downed as part of a suicidal plot. The former prime minister said that authorities have always considered a murder-suicide plot, but have never made their views public until recently, following similar remarks from the Prime Minister of Australia. Now, Najib said that it would have been unfair and legally irresponsible to make such claims, considering the black boxes in the cockpit voice recorders have not been found and there's no conclusive proof. Najib told an online Malaysian news service recently that there were several reasons to suspect that pilot Zahari Ahmad Shah was involved, because he not only had a home flight simulator, but the plane's transponders were shut off shortly after it left Malaysian airspace. Now, if you remember, flight MH370 is one of the world's biggest mysteries after vanishing on its way from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing on March 8th, 2014. A 2-year, 3-nation search underwater, that is, in the southern Indian Ocean in January 17, found nothing, no trace of the aircraft. And a second search was even launched in 2018. And Derrel, they didn't find anything there. This plane literally vanished.
Well, for me, there are a few problems with that. Number one is that there should have been wreckage debris, something floating. I mean, there always is. And at some point there just is debris. That is a mystery in itself. But using Occam's razor here, I would have to go with the first conclusion that, in fact, this is due to someone actually taking this airplane out, either through suicide or some other method. But even again, if a foreign nation shot it down or something like this, where's the debris?
Yeah, where's the debris field? You always have the search crews find something. They haven't found anything for this plane. So the theories of it just vanished in thin air. We know that didn't happen. But I've also heard some conspiracy theories that this plane was escorted somewhere. The passengers were deplaned and never seen again. That was one theory I heard.
It's hard to get rid of all the bodies and all the people doing that. Yeah. I hear these stories also from the U.S. points of view. And the problem with those theories, to me, they just get a little too far out there for me. I just don't find any evidence of it. It just doesn't work for me.
Well, Derrel Sims, the alien hunter, has been our co-host this evening. He's going to join us for our next episode. Derrel, stick around. We're going to be with you in a second. And folks, join us again on Facebook Live in just a few moments. We've got our next guest standing by. And if you can find us in social media, you're watching us on our Facebook page, look for us on Twitter as The Road Beyond Podcast, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Road Beyond Podcast, and you'll get notifications when brand new shows like this are launched and out there. We'll see you in a few minutes, Facebook Live, and next time right here on The Road Beyond.